At 5:42 on the morning of March 11, 1968, Specialist 4th Class Daniel Cole lay on his stomach in the damp red clay of Tay Ninh Province, 20 yards from a Viet Cong tunnel entrance no one in his battalion wanted to touch again. A low mist clung to the treeline. Mosquitoes whined over the stagnant water in the bomb craters. Cole's face was streaked with mud, sweat and charcoal. In his hands he held not a rifle, but a spool of olive-drab field telephone wire and a small canvas bag full of scrap metal and blasting caps the other engineers had spent a week laughing at. They called it his country boy wire trick. In the next 40 minutes, it would shut down an entire Viet Cong tunnel entrance that had already killed 9 Americans. The tunnel sat at the edge of a tree line overlooking rice paddies, 26 kilometers northwest of Dao Tieng. The infantry called the area the Finger because of the way the jungle ridge pushed out toward the open fields. Intelligence said the tunnel connected to a larger network running under the ridge, a spoke, off the Iron Triangle. 2 days earlier, a platoon from Bravo Company had tried to approach the entrance. A command-detonated mine killed the point man. 2 more men went down to a bouncing Betty and a well-placed sniper shot. The platoon leader pulled his men back and called in engineers. The engineers took one look at the entrance, the disturbed ground, the spider holes along the flanks and recommended airstrikes. Battalion said no. There was a hamlet less than 400 yards away and too many civilians still in the area. That was when Cole raised his hand. 22 years old, 5'10", 158 pounds, born on a 40-acre farm outside Jasper, Alabama. Third of 5 brothers. Learned to string barbed wire fence at 11. Built snares for feral hogs at 13. By 16 he could walk a fence line in the dark and tell, by the tension of the wire under his fingers, where a coyote had pushed through. He had joined the army in 1966 because, as he explained on his enlistment paperwork, the cows weren't going anywhere and the war was. The men in his engineer platoon called him Country. The infantry shortened it to Boy. Somewhere along the line, Country Boy stuck. Cole's job on paper was simple. Combat Engineer, 1st Engineer Battalion, attached to the 1st Infantry Division. Mines, demolitions, obstacles. In practice, it meant he spent his days out in front of the grunts, poking the ground with a bayonet, listening for the hollow thunk of booby-trap tunnels, or crawling alongside tank tracks to feel for pressure wires before they crushed them. He was quiet, never raised his voice in the field, and never turned in a standard solution if he thought he could build a better one out of whatever wire, scrap, and explosive he could scrounge from the engineer dump. The mockery started in late February. Cole had come back from a sweep with a torn shirt and a grin on his face. He dropped a bundle of salvaged field telephone wire on the table in the engineer tent and asked the platoon sergeant if he could keep it. The sergeant, Staff Sergeant Duran, wanted to know what a country boy from Alabama needed 200 meters of old WD-1 for. Cole spread it out on the packed dirt floor and started tying loops. Hedgerow snares, hog snares, figure 4 triggers. He explained, in his slow drawl, that a tunnel entrance was just a hole in the ground like a hog trail was just a path through a fence. You could feel when something big passed through if you tied the right wires in the right places. The room erupted. Gonna rope yourself a Viet Cong country? What are you, the hog whisperer now? You think Charlie's gonna walk into your chicken wire, boy? Even the battalion armorer got in on it. When Cole came by the shop looking for extra blasting caps and scrap shrapnel, broken links of track, clipped nails, bent cotter pins, the armorer held up one of the twisted wire bundles between 2 fingers and asked if it was for squirrels or communists this time. Someone wrote Hillbilly Home Defense KIT on a cardboard box and dumped all of Cole's wire contraptions inside. The box sat under his cot, half joke, half trash can. Cole didn't argue. He just kept tying, adjusting, testing, and watching the tension of the wire on his fingers the way he'd watched fence lines back home. On March 9th, Bravo Company stumbled into the tunnel entrance at the Finger. They found it while sweeping a hedgerow the VC had used as a firing line the week before. The point man, Private Harris, stepped off the narrow trail to cut across a patch of ground that looked slightly smoother than the rest. The blast lifted him 2 feet into the air and dropped him in pieces 10 yards away. As the platoon spread out, trying to find cover in the scattered scrub, a second explosion went off on their flank. A sniper round punched through Sergeant Mendoza's neck as he dragged a wounded man behind a tree. In less than 3 minutes, they had 3 dead and 4 wounded without ever seeing more than a flicker of movement among the trees. They fell back and called for engineers. Captain Weiss, Bravo's commander, briefed the battalion staff that night under a poncho rigged between 2 trucks. He wanted the tunnel entrance collapsed. He did not want to send another platoon into a meat grinder built out of sticks and homemade mines. Battalion intelligence confirmed what Weiss already suspected. The entrance was not a simple one-room spider hole. Aerial photographs and captured documents suggested it was one of several mouths feeding into a tunnel complex running under the ridge, big enough for a platoon of Viet Cong to disappear under their feet. The operations officer suggested CS gas. The artillery liaison suggested variable time fuses. The S3 assistant, a young captain fresh from Fort Benning, mentioned a new tunnel rat team attached to another brigade. No one wanted to volunteer their own men to go into that hole. Cole stood against the hood of an M113, listening in the shadows, helmet pushed back on his head, wire spool under his arm. When the briefing broke up, he stepped forward. "Sir," he said quietly to Captain Weiss, "I think I can shut that entrance without putting anybody inside." Weiss stared at him. 22 with a baby face, blue eyes, and a drawl so thick the captain from Boston sometimes asked him to repeat himself just so the other officers could listen. Weiss had heard the jokes about the country boy wire trick. He'd seen the cardboard box under Cole's cot. It was not standard Army issue. "You think so, Specialist?" Weiss asked. "Engineers already recommended explosives from a distance." "Yes, sir," Cole said. "But they'll have the mouth wired. And if they've got vents and secondary entrances, a straight blast might just give them warning and more air. I can feel where they pass through, sir. We don't have to blow the whole ridge. Just choke off that doorway." Weiss did not like the idea of trusting men's lives to something built out of scrap wire and hog snare logic. He also did not like sending another platoon past that hedgerow without a better plan. He told Cole he'd think about it. 2 hours later, after the battalion commander finished reading the casualty report from Bravo, Weiss found Cole sitting on an ammo crate stripping insulation off a length of WD-1 wire with his teeth. "You'll have one shot," Weiss said. "No heroics. You're not going in the hole. You rig your wire trick from outside. The second I think it's going sideways, I'm pulling the plug and we're dropping everything we have on that ridge." "Understood." "Yes, sir," Cole said, and smiled like a man who just found a broken fence post he'd been meaning to fix for a year. If you want to hear how a farm kid's wire web went up against a tunnel system the Viet Cong had been perfecting for 2 decades, stay with us. Stories like this don't come from Hollywood. They come from after-action reports, field notes, and letters home that sit in boxes until someone opens them. And if you want more of them, you know what to do. Hit that like button so this story travels a little further than Tay Nin's red dirt. Back to Cole. He spent the next 24 hours doing what he had done as a teenager while thunderstorms rolled over the pastures in Alabama. He tied, untied, tightened, and tested tension. The country boy wire trick was not one device. It was 3 ideas layered together. The first layer was a detection web. He ran bare telephone wire low through the undergrowth around the entrance, no higher than a man's calf, anchored to roots and stakes so that any weight moving across the mouth of the tunnel would pull on at least one line. The second layer was a transfer grid, vertical loops and angled strands that would multiply and redirect that pull into a small cluster of wooden stakes driven deep into the soft ground near the lip of the entrance. The third layer was the part the armor had mocked the hardest, a set of small shaped charges, improvised from C4, scrap metal, curtain rods and nails, tied to the stakes in such a way that when the right tension came onto the grid, the stakes would jerk, release the blasting caps held in friction, and send a focused blast straight down into the tunnel mouth, collapsing the throat instead of blowing outward. "You sure you're not trying to catch hogs?" Staff Sergeant Duran asked the night before the mission, watching Cole tie another series of loops around a stake. "Looks like something my granddad had behind his barn." "Yes, Sergeant," Cole said. "Except hogs don't throw grenades back." At 3:15 on March 11th, Cole moved forward with a 6-man security element from Bravo Company. No cigarettes. No talking above a whisper. No helmets banging against tree trunks. The moon had set an hour before. The sky was a low ceiling of cloud. He carried his wire, his stakes, his bag of scrap charges, and an M16 slung across his back more for comfort than expectation. If anyone started shooting within 50 yards of the tunnel mouth, the plan was over. They reached the hedgerow at 3:47. The tunnel entrance looked different in the dark. Less like a doorway, more like a stain on the ground where the jungle had sagged. The previous day's explosions had churned the earth into clods and scars. Cole lay on his stomach and pressed his ear to the dirt. He heard nothing but insects and the slow drip of water from the leaves. That didn't mean the tunnel was empty. It meant whoever was inside was patient. He began with the detection lines. He crawled on his belly, inchworming through the grass, running thin strands of wire back and forth between the low trunks, tying them off at angles only he seemed to understand. Every time he pulled a knot tight, he touched the wire with the back of his knuckles, feeling its give, the way he had once checked a fence line for breaks without looking. The infantrymen behind him watched in silence. 4 hours earlier, one of them had called his gear the Alabama Dreamcatcher. Now they kept their comments to themselves. By 4:29 the web was in place. He moved on to the grid, sinking short stakes into the soft earth along a shallow arc near the entrance. He tied the lines so that a series of faint pulls from different directions would converge on the stakes with more force than any single step could create. When he finished, the whole thing looked like nothing at all, just a few extra shadows where the grass bent in the wrong direction. Only the wire on his fingers told the real story. The charges came last. Cole pulled the small improvised shaped charges from his bag, one at a time, pressing them gently into the soil just off the lip of the tunnel entrance. Each one had a hand-cut groove to focus the force downward. Each one was tied to a stake so that it would not move more than an inch in any direction. He did not want a huge explosion. He wanted a quiet, brutal throat collapse, like caving in the top of a rotten fence post with a single precise blow. At 5:11, Cole backed away from the entrance, following the last strand of wire through the brush to a shallow depression 15 meters off to the right. From there, he and the Bravo squad leader, Sergeant Ellis, would watch. If anyone tripped the web by accident, a stray dog, a frightened villager, one of their own, they could cut the line before the tension translated to the firing stakes. "Looks like a spider's nightmare," Ellis whispered, peering through the brush at the entrance. "You really think this is gonna work, country boy?" "Yes, Sergeant," Cole said. "If they come through that door like they did yesterday. If they come up somewhere else, we'll know it too." "How?" "Because they won't be dead where they're supposed to be." They settled into the depression and waited. The jungle woke slowly. First the insects, their pitch rising with the light. Then the birds calling from the canopy. Somewhere far off, artillery thumped like a man closing a distant door. Cole watched the wire where it ran between his fingers. It lay slack, untroubled. His mind drifted, not to Alabama or home, but to every fence post he had ever reset after a storm. You didn't fight the whole pasture, his father had told him. You fixed the weak points and let the rest of the field hold itself together. At 6:02 the wire twitched. It was not much. A breath against his skin. A slight, slow tightening, then release. Someone had brushed a strand lightly. Not enough weight to trip the system, but enough to send a whisper along the line. Cole's pupils narrowed. He raised a hand to stop Ellis from speaking. "Could be a pig," Ellis murmured. "If it was a pig," Cole said, "we'd still feel it." That was a toe. The next movement came 3 minutes later. A firmer pull, low and to the left, on a line tied to the base of a sapling. Then another, slightly offset, as if two men had stepped through the same patch from different angles, testing the ground with the tips of their boots. "They're feeling for mines," Cole said softly. "They know what happened yesterday." "How many?" Ellis asked. "More than 2, Cole said. "Less than a squad. Yet." The web stayed quiet for nearly 10 minutes. Then at 6:15 the pattern changed. Instead of isolated touches, the lines began to pulse in sequence, left, right, center, as if a file of men were funneling toward the entrance along the same path, disciplined, careful, but confident. Whoever led the group had either decided the area was clear or accepted the risk. Cole pictured a black pajama leg brushing each strand, the fabric catching and releasing as they moved. The stakes did their work. As the tension on the web built, the lines running back to the firing arc tightened. One by one the stakes took the load. Their notched heads flexed, holding friction caps in place. They were like the posts of an old fence sagging under the weight of wet wire, each one giving a little, waiting for something to push them past their limit. It happened at 6:19. 3 nearly simultaneous pulls, one from directly in front of the entrance, 2 from oblique angles where a pair of men would stand to cover it, sent a surge through the grid. Cole felt it in his hands, a clean, committed tug that said these weren't scouts anymore. These were fighters going in or out. "Now," he whispered and let go. The stakes snapped forward as the friction gave way. The blasting caps seated in their grooves tore free and bit into C4. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the earth at the lip of the tunnel jumped with a dull inward cough, like a giant exhaling underground. The sound was nothing like the big crump of an artillery round. It was tighter, meaner, focused. The entrance collapsed in on itself. Dirt and roots and the crude wooden shoring that held up the mouth of the tunnel slammed downward, plugging the opening like a cork. The ground sagged in a circle 3 feet wide, then held. A single muffled shout came from somewhere below, cut short as the air in the throat space disappeared. Ellis swore under his breath. Cole watched the wire. It lay slack again. Then the real surprise began. 30 yards to the right, where there had been nothing but thick brush and a slight depression the day before, the ground shifted. A square of earth lifted, hinges of root and clay swinging up. A second exit. 2 men in black pajamas began to push their way out, one after the other, carrying AK-47s. Their faces were turned toward the tree line, toward where Bravo Company had been the previous day. They did not know the Americans had moved. Ellis's first burst cut the second man down in the doorway. The first stumbled forward into a crossfire as the rest of the security team opened up from their concealed positions. More figures tried to force their way up from below, only to be driven back by fire and falling dirt. Within 20 seconds, the second exit was a tangle of bodies and collapsed spoil. Cole's web had done more than collapse a tunnel mouth. It had flushed a squad of Viet Cong into the open in the one direction they had not prepared to fight. By 6:27 it was over. 7 bodies lay around the 2 tunnel mouths. 4 more men, dazed and coughing, crawled from a third, hastily dug escape hole farther down the ridge, hands above their heads, eyes wide at the sight of Americans waiting for them on the wrong side of their own tunnel system. Bravo Company moved in, clearing the immediate area, dragging the prisoners back under guard. Captain Weiss arrived at 7:10. He stood at the edge of the original entrance, boots on fresh fallen dirt, and stared at the sagged circle of earth. A tunnel collapsed at the throat was hard to reopen from below without tools and time. Time the VC in that sector did not have any more. "You did this with fence tricks," Weiss said. "Yes, sir," Cole said. "Hogs taught me something useful after all." "How many do you think were down there?" "Hard to say, sir. A squad for sure. Maybe more. Tunnels deep. Might have cut them off from the rest. Might have just choked their front door. Either way, they're not using this entrance again. If you're still here, you understand why we tell these stories. The official records would call this just another engineer-assisted denial of enemy subterranean facility. But that's not what happened. What happened is that a farm kid brought hog snare logic to a jungle war and outthought a tunnel system the Viet Cong had been building for years. If that deserves more than a line in a report, you know what to do. Like the video so more people see it. Back at the fire support base that night, the joke stopped. The cardboard box under Cole's cot disappeared. In its place, Staff Sergeant Duran laid out a clean poncho liner and told Cole to spread his wire patterns where everyone could see them. Men came by in ones and twos to look, to ask questions, to pick up a stake and thumb the notches in the wood. "You really felt them walking?" one asked. "Yes," Cole said. "Same as I'd feel a steer leaning on a loose post." "You think you can rig this around a perimeter?" "If the ground's soft enough and I've got the wire, yes." "Sir," he added when he realized the battalion XO had joined the circle. Word moved faster than official orders. Within a week, other engineer platoons were asking for the country boy diagrams. Cole drew them on whatever paper he could find, the backs of maps, the inside of C-ration lids, a captured VC propaganda leaflet. He labeled the strands not with technical terms but with simple words: front door, side path, trip branch. He explained tension in inches and pounds instead of newtons. Most of the men who read the sketches understood exactly what he meant. In late March, an intelligence sergeant from brigade came by with a tape recorder and a yellow legal pad. He wanted to know every detail: how long the wire was, how deep the stakes were, how much C4 he'd used, what kind of soil worked best. He wrote it all down, nodding, occasionally scribbling field expedient only in the margin. The Army would not officially adopt country boy wire tricks as doctrine. There was no line for hog snare-inspired tension grid for tunnel denial in the engineer field manual. But in the months that followed, similar webs of salvaged telephone wire and improvised charges appeared quietly around tunnel mouths from Tay Ninh to War Zone C. Men who had never seen a hog snare in their lives watched the wire with their fingers and learned to feel when something bigger than a pig walked through their perimeter. Cole finished his tour in Vietnam in January of 1969. He went home with a combat infantryman badge, an Army Commendation Medal with V device for valor, a slight limp in his right leg from a later mortar fragment, and exactly one photograph of himself in uniform, taken the week before he rotated out. In it, he stands in front of a sandbagged bunker, holding a spool of wire like a man about to mend a fence. He is not smiling, but there is a calmness in his eyes that men who served with him recognized immediately. He did not talk much about tunnels when he got back to Alabama. Neighbors asked if he had seen combat. He said he'd been busy. The cows still needed moving, the fences still sagged, and the pastures did not care about Tay Ninh. For a while, the spool of WD-1 he brought home sat in the corner of the barn, next to the rolled barbed wire and extra posts. He used pieces of it to fix a gate, hang a lantern, tie back a loose board. The rest slowly rusted. Years later, a young officer at Fort Leonard Wood found a copy of the brigade intelligence summary that mentioned an unnamed specialist who had used telephone wire to collapse a tunnel entrance without entering it. He tracked down the after-action report, then the tape recording, then an old engineer sergeant who remembered the kid from Alabama. The officer wrote an article for a small military journal about field expedient tension-based early warning systems and counter-tunnel operations. The article did not mention hog snares. It did not mention country boy tricks. But the logic was there. Today, when modern armies talk about subterranean warfare, they focus on ground-penetrating radar, fiber-optic cameras, and robots that can crawl through concrete culverts. Those tools are vital. The war changes, the technology advances. Yet the core problem remains the same. Somewhere underground, out of sight, an enemy builds doors you cannot see. And somewhere on the surface, someone has to figure out how to close them without walking through first. Daniel Cole never wrote a book like John George did. His name does not appear in most histories of the war. His citation for the Army Commendation Medal says only that he displayed ingenuity and courage while conducting combat engineer operations against enemy tunnel systems. But if you listen closely, underneath the formal language, you can hear the twang of barbed wire and the faint, almost imperceptible tightening of a line between two fence posts. If this story reached you, if you could feel that wire in your own fingers as you listened, do one thing for the men like Cole who never thought anyone outside their platoon would remember their names. Like, subscribe, turn on notifications. And in the comments, tell us where you're watching from and if someone in your family ever served in Vietnam. These country boy tricks, and the quiet men behind them don't belong buried in a file cabinet. They belong exactly where you are right now, in the open, in the light, remembered,